Okay, we'll go to the next presentation, sharing data through the YODA project, one of the great names of any new project I've ever heard. God knows that's worth a fortune, that YODA project. Early experiences by Joe Ross and colleagues. Go ahead, Joe.
Someone should have trademarked that name.
You should have trademarked it.
Thank you, Carrie Gross, who's here, who came up with that name. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about the YODA project, which is the Yale Open Data Access Project. I am here among a representative of several who've spent a lot of time and effort in launching this, including Harlan Krumholtz in the back, Carrie Gross in the back, and many others. So I'll take your hard questions, but you should congratulate them as well. So just in the interest of full disclosure, the YODA project is funded by a research grant through Yale from Johnson & Johnson, and we were formerly funded by Medtronic. And I've also received research grant funding from the FDA, CMS, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. And also I'm an associate editor at JAMA Internal Medicine. Should have put that on. So 50% of clinical trials are never published. This is not a fact that's unsurprising to many people in this room. And even those that are published after long delays, many after more than 2 years. Even when they are published, only a limited portion of the collected data is reported, particularly for secondary endpoints, safety details that never make it into the primary publication, or even any of the secondary publications. This, of course, is a problem in clinical practice. It makes it so patients and physicians are frequently in the position of making treatment decisions that are based on only a fraction of the potentially available clinical data that could have informed that decision. And so we need to find ways to improve publication and reporting of research. And I would be remiss not to mention, with Deborah Zarin sitting next to me on the panel, the importance of publishing and reporting results in clinicaltrials.gov. Everyone, report, report, report. But more can be done to strengthen the scientific enterprise if we were also to consider data sharing. And the Institute of Medicine spent a long time deliberating on this question over the past 4 to 5 years. They released a report now probably a year and a half ago on sharing clinical trial data. And at the top line, right, sharing data ensures that all data are being used to inform clinical decisions. But there's more to it than that. It positions research as a public good. It respects the contributions of all the participants, including maximizing the value of collected data by making it available to others for other additional research questions, while minimizing the duplicative data collection. And this can't be said enough. If large data sets are made available for others to use, it prevents the need to enroll patients in new trials as part of their education and training curriculum. In many ways, it facilitates secondary studies of existing data. This can be to look at rare outcomes. This can be meta-analyses. It can be reanalyzing data to validate the original findings. And at the very least, it also promotes transparency and reproducibility, both in the sample and the design and the analysis, because you can learn more by looking through the data set than you could just learn by looking at the registration. And Fee just asked about examples of how is science strengthened, examples of where data sharing. For those of you who like podcasts, there was just a terrific one by Malcolm Gladwell on revisionist history, where he talked about unearthing this data set that had not been published, a clinical trial of a diet. After 40 years, BMJ published the paper 40 years after, and we learned a lot from this really technically well-done study, and of course, Malcolm Gladwell tells the story better than I would. In response to these concerns around data sharing, our group launched what we call the YODA project, and this is our homepage. And the purpose of this talk today is really to describe our early experience with setting up the project, sharing clinical research data through it, and hopefully others can learn from that experience. So when we launched the YODA project, we start with this, trying to identify what our statement of principles would be. And after much back and forth among the project team, we identified these 4 key principles around which the entire project is based. We wanted to promote the sharing of clinical research data to advance science and improve public health and healthcare. We wanted to promote the responsible conduct of research. We wanted to ensure good stewardship of clinical research data by external investigators, and we wanted to protect the rights of research participants. So, and all of the decisions that we've made have been to echo these 4 principles. So we started sharing data actually back in 2011, or approximately. That's when the YODA project was launched, long before the Institute of Medicine was taking on this question. And this partnership grew about. Medtronic had a product about which safety concerns had been raised. This product called Infuse, which is a biologic that's sort of put on a medical device inserted in the spine to promote bone growth. And we said to them, we formed this project around essentially reanalyzing their patient-level data. And the effort was really focused on soliciting, through a competitive mechanism, 2 independent groups that were going to take all this clinical trial data, reanalyze it on themselves, come to the conclusions about the safety and efficacy of the product. And then after that was done, we would make the data available to others. So this both provided 2 high-quality reviews that were conducted in tandem, published simultaneously, actually eventually in the Annals of Internal Medicine. And the goal was to sort of provide public assurance through the independent review and reanalysis. But the data access policy was the beginning of sort of thinking about what we could do to promote data sharing later on. And we convened a steering committee, also included Deborah Zarin and others, experts in biostatistics and clinical trial design and clinical trial policy, where we set a policy that required registration and public reporting and publication. Anyone could apply to use this data. There were 4 requests over the time that it was available, and we had 2 completed projects that were both published in the literature. But the YODA project really gained momentum when we began a partnership with Johnson & Johnson, and this is really our sort of signature initiative at this point. This was initiated in 2014, and there was no concern about getting people to reanalyze the data. This was all about, in a sort of systematic way. This instead was an effort that was focused on promoting and facilitating access to clinical trial data. And this was all pharmaceutical products, including legacy trials, so trials that had happened in the past, they were willing to go back and make available. It included device and diagnostic products as of 2015, and actually consumer products as of 2017. And we maintained this governance structure with a formal steering committee. We revised our access policies. We set up very formal procedures, all of which were made publicly available through other soliciting comments from experts, other stakeholders, and even the public. We put out a public call for comments. And then we launched the YODA project website, and that's where you go to find information about the trials and information on the metadata that's affiliated with it and essentially what's available. So this is a trial page. If you go to our website, this is what you would see. It lists the trial. It provides links to a CSR summary that's made available by Johnson & Johnson, to the clinical trials registration number, to the primary citation. It includes other information, including what the product is used for, the size of the trial, other supporting documentation, and information like that. And we are actually now going back, we thought that to make the site even more useful to potential requesters, we're not going to only have the enrollment number, but we're also going to have the mean age and the proportion that are women and the portion that are minority in order to facilitate that type of subgroup research, because it's hard to know, who is in the study just from this page. We require an application when somebody wants to use the data, and this is pretty simple. It's the investigator's name, their affiliation. They have to provide a narrative summary of the project, a public abstract, and then a fairly detailed research proposal. They tend to be between 2 and 4 pages. We had always called it a 1-pager, but people provide enough information that I would call it a 2 to 3-pager. It provides background, the significance and objectives of the work, the study design, main outcomes, and a statistical analysis plan, along with a conflict of interest statement. This application is then reviewed by at least 3 members of the YODA project team who often provide comments back to the requester and then make a decision about whether or not to approve it. And once approved, a data use agreement is required that stipulates what can be done with the data, that you can't re-identify patients as part of the project, that the data has to remain secured and can't be redistributed. All data are maintained on a secure platform that's currently managed by SAS, and investigators access it via a virtual network, a VPN. And this prevents distribution and protects patient privacy. So we started making data available in around 2014, and you can see the number of requests has steadily risen. We get anywhere between 5 and 10 a quarter, and we're now at about 80 overall requests. The median number of trials that are requested in any individual request is 3. Very few, I mean, about a quarter, are just for one. Mostly people want multiple trials as part of a request. We've had some come in for more than 40 or 50 trials, and those tend to be more methodological projects. And we made sure everything is publicly available and transparent. So every decision we make, every trial that's available, it's all listed on our website. So any approved request that comes in, we report that on our website. We provide the information. We provide a link to their research proposal so that someone who's then later on evaluating the request or looking at the publication that results from it can see what was pre-specified as part of the work. Of the 78 that we've received so far, 91% have been approved, 1 remains under review, and 6 were withdrawn or closed. And this usually means that somebody put in a request for data that wasn't available within the trial. So they wanted to use scans or images that the company couldn't properly identify or make available, or they wanted pharmacokinetic information that hadn't been collected as part of the original trial. Nearly all of the requests that come in do require some administrative revision. So this takes time on the part of our staff. But what I think is kind of interesting is about a third have required scientific revisions after our review. So, they come in and we're looking to approve every request. We want to make this data available to as many people as possible. And there are times we get requests that we just can't understand the methods. And so we have to provide not necessarily very detailed comments, but we have to go back to them and ask for revisions so that someone could then later look at it and understand enough of what they were trying to do to evaluate their project. The most common reasons that people request data is usually to look at a new secondary aim or meta-analysis, and there's been now about 20 that have said they've wanted to validate the findings of prior research. And thus far, of the 71 that have been approved, 2 have completed their projects which have been published, 4 are currently under peer review, and 7 were discontinued. And I think this is actually kind of interesting because what happens is people get access to the data, they go through all the steps, they jump through the hoops, they sign the data use agreement, everything goes okay, and then they start to work on the server, the SaaS server, and they realize that it's more complicated to work with data than they realize. And it's not just a simple pressing of buttons and they get frustrated. 1 minute. So I'm actually just about finished. So, this is our story. This is sort of what we've understood with the YODA project. There are other data repositories out there that are sharing data. These are the 2 best known. BioLink, which is managed by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, has been making data available for years and years. And there's another multi-sponsor clinical trial environment of industry called clinicalstudydatarequest.com that also has been making data available. And I think this is sort of where the conversation is to go. This is the challenges that are ahead for us. We need to now, we've shown that we can share data, but now we need to figure out what are the best practices to adopt among these data sharing platforms. What facilitates the use most easily? What about these data analytics servers, which questers find difficult to work with? And what metadata are needed to best facilitate and make use of the data? Question that Howard raised before, who should pay for this? Right now, industry is paying for it. They're paying to make their data available for others to use. Is that the right model, or is that a sustainable model? And what we have found particularly frustrating is engaging the research community to use the data and to understand that using it is complicated. It's all well and good for us to do all of this work and make data available, but if no one's going to come and use it, we haven't succeeded in our work. And there's lots of challenges around data use agreements and how long data should be made available, and how to encourage others beyond the large pharmaceutical companies or the other big funders that are doing this now, particularly at academic medical centers. And then, of course, there's the challenge that the Institute of Medicine spent a fair bit of time talking about, which is what are the incentives for sharers and users that will promote the greatest success. So I just want to thank all of the people that have been involved in this, and I would encourage you all to go to our website and learn more about the trials that we are making available. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Joe's paper's open for questions. See if someone's coming to the mic. Nope. Joe, can you go back to slide 11?
Tell me, I don't see the numbers, so you gotta tell me when it's 11.
Oh, keep going. It's the one with the data right there. Stop. It appears to me here that actually the number of requests are going down. Am I misreading this?
Well, I don't know if it's going down. It sort of hovers between 5 and 10. I don't think there's really a strong trend there. But we did have a couple of good months where there were 9, 3 months in a row.
Okay. Question over here.
Hi, yeah, I'm Stephanie Kinnan. I work for a medical journal, and recently we've been discussing some of the ethical concerns about data sharing. Obviously, we want to encourage it, but we're concerned about, when does it become duplicate publication when you have multiple groups using the same, let's say, patient set to produce studies. And we're just kind of wondering, like, what would be a good policy? Obviously, that's something at least we need to disclose, and I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I would turn to the journals, sort of what counts as duplicate publication. My thinking on it is that if it's the same group publishing the same study twice, that's a duplicate publication. But if it's 2 different groups working with the data, one replicating the other, that's science. I mean, that's the key, right? Sort of replicating the methods and the results and making sure people find the same things. So I wouldn't consider that duplicate publication. But it does raise this question: when data sets are made available, what are the cuts and slivers, and when is it okay? When is something important enough? When is it novel enough? But we do have a lot of experience with that. I mean, the National Center for Health Statistics has been making survey data available for 50 years that numerous investigators have used to ask numerous different questions, and we've never really run into this type of problem.
Right here, we have time for just the people at the microphones, right here.
Scott Lemare from Baylor College of Medicine and the Journal of Surgical Research. You raised the issue of who's going to pay for this. Can you tell us what was the cost to set up this elaborate, fantastic infrastructure, and what's the annual cost of maintaining it?
Just short answers, Jim.
Yeah, so I can talk to you more about the actual cost. I can assure you, though, that the cost for the SAS analytic server is far more than the cost for us to set up a website and maintain our enrollment. And that's been the biggest challenge as we've tried to engage with the big trial funders, is that they don't want to pay for this SAS infrastructure.
And the personnel and all as well.
It's less than 1 FTE.
Okay, Lisa and then Doug, and then we'll stop. Lisa, go ahead.
Lisa Barrow. I completely agree with what you said about the data being hard to use, and particularly when you're going post hoc like that. And that's why when people do an individual patient data meta-analysis, they try to collect the data in a format where it can all be used prospectively. But I guess I'm wondering, because I am a little cynical, whether that data is sometimes deliberately difficult to use, and that's just based on experience we've had getting data from a pharmaceutical trade organization who had it available in 2 formats, one that was easy to use and one that wasn't, and we were given the one that was not easy to use.
Yeah, so I share your cynicism, and I've been there on both sides. So I can tell you that in the data that we've used, actually, so we've requested data through clinicalstudydatarequest.com, which was data from GSK, and it was actually pretty easy. I mean, it's challenging if you've never worked with data before, because it comes to the FDA in 14 different files, one for demographics and one for the first year follow-up and one for the second. And so it's messy to sort of merge, but if you know what you're doing, it's not so bad. I think at least right now, the groups that are sharing data are trying to do it in a way that makes it more easy to use, not harder.
Last question in the back, Doug.
Yeah, Doug Altman, University of Oxford. I'm on the committee that reviews the applications for the clinical study data requests, which you mentioned. My question is, on what grounds would you reject an application?
So we have 2 stipulations. You can't use the data for commercial purposes, and you can't use the data as part of, like pursuant of litigation. If someone can justify that they're using the data to address a generalizable scientific or public health question, we are trying to make sure, we're trying to give them access to the data. We have a very low bar, and that's deliberate.
Right. Thanks, Joe.